Oh, cheers.
Once there were nearly 70,000 of these red telephone boxes throughout Britain. The same familiar design, whether outside the village shop or on the street corner. They are now seen as a milestone in British taste, one of the most successful pieces of industrial design. They come from an age when a high standard in public design was the norm. To some, they are reminders of a more ordered, stable society, which, like the majority of the kiosks, has been toppled. These are remains of the Jubilee kiosk, known as the K6. But there is life in them yet, especially in America or Japan, for use as cocktail cabinets, aviaries, or vending machines. Some people even put phones in them.
Lot one then is a K6. What would you say for that one? Someone saw me, a couple of £100, 200. What do you will then? £80 a bid in the front there at 80. At £80 a bid, at 80. At 80 only bid now, 90 I want now, at 80 only bid. At 80, at 90, at 90. 90 bid on the right there, at 90.
Up and down the country, the Jubilee boxes are going under the hammer. Production of the Jubilees stopped in the 1960s. Since 1985, British Telecom, intent on modernising the system, has been rapidly replacing them. It has been accused of being worse than any vandal for carrying out this systematic purge.
160, thank you, number 15. Got 2, another K6, put me over that one, near 2 again, some at 100.
I think the K6 is a good design because it is more than something that's just utilitarian. It's composed by an architect, it's monumental, it's beautifully proportioned, has a proper top to it, conceived in architectural terms. And somehow, because it's monumental, it looks right everywhere. It's not intrusive. It was, of course, once part of the scenery of Britain.
It's gone on to become a symbol. It's become something that you just have to show an image of it and people think of England. I mean, this is one of the reasons why British Telecom can sell them off so lucratively, because people want them all over the place. They've even shipped one into the Falklands Islands to make soldiers there feel at home when they phone back into the old country. So it has become a kind of absolute emblem of a traditional English national identity.
The symbol of national identity has now been replaced by these. Designs which originated in America and have been adapted for use in Britain. They are the successors to a series of public kiosks that first began to appear in our streets at the turn of the century. These early phone boxes were crude affairs made of wood. They were called silence cabinets. Not only did the cabinets cut down on the noise from the outside, they also reduced the amount of noise the caller made. Some of these early silence cabinets were grand, such as this one in High Holborn, looking like a Parisian advertising drum. Others had an attendant who sat in the box and changed places with his customer after taking their money and connecting them to the operator. There was no accepted design for what was becoming a prominent piece of street furniture. This was Folkestone's first public call box, erected in a shrubbery at the cost of £11 10s in the rustic arbour style. Two designs in particular took up the running, the Birmingham and the Norwich, each one named after the city in which it was made, although neither was likely to reflect much glory on them. But it was not until 1921, after the telephone network had been nationalised, that a standard telephone box appeared. The result was simply called Kiosk Number 1, the K1, a prefabricated concrete box with metal glazing bars. A few still remain, like this one at Bembridge on the Isle of Wight. Many thought it was an ugly piece of design. This was certainly the view taken by most London boroughs who refused to have it on their streets.
I think that civic responsibility towards design was probably at its highest in the 1920s. There was a movement which began before the First World War to improve cities. Books like Civic Art were published, the feeling that there should be rational planning and that ordinary objects should be well designed. And after the First World War, I think that achieved fruition with such things as the telephone kiosk, a product of a proper competition organised by the Royal Fine Art Commission, And other public works, like the underground stations with the high quality of design there, by Charles Holden, commissioned by Frank Pick. It was a great period, and we've lost something since.
To overcome the objections to the K1 by the design-conscious London boroughs, the Post Office initiated a competition to find a new kiosk. Despite some of the colourful solutions suggested, news leaked out that a design by the GPO's own engineering department had won. The Architects' Journal complained that no one with any knowledge of design could feel anything but indignation with the pattern that seems to satisfy the official mind. However, fortunately, the Ministry of Works agreed. It complained that the design was commonplace and entirely devoid of architectural character, and refused to have this kiosk in the royal parks. So a second competition was held. The GPO's entry from the first round now faced this design from the Birmingham Civic Society. Sir John Burnett, one of 3 architects to enter, produced a kiosk with a fish-scale dome, much like an Art Nouveau lampshade. Sir Robert Lorimer's design was positively encrusted with national emblems, crowns, lions, roses, thistles and fleur-de-lis, and boasted a 2-tiered roof. And this, with its Georgian glazing bars and flattened dome, came from a man who had distinguished himself previously as a church architect, Giles Gilbert Scott. The choice was narrowed down to 2, and it seemed for a while that Lorimer's would win, for the detailed costing brought it in at £6 cheaper than Scott's. Britain narrowly missed having this as its standard telephone kiosk. But Scott's kiosk was undoubtedly the better design. Before the final decision was taken, prototypes of all 5 designs were made. 4 of them have long disappeared, but amazingly the Scott prototype has survived. Protected by the arches leading to Burlington House in Piccadilly, this is the first Scott telephone kiosk, made of wood, still going strong after nearly 70 years of use. Scott's design it was to be, and 1924 was undoubtedly his year. In May, he was knighted by George V after the consecration of the newly completed choir of Liverpool Cathedral. Scott had been appointed the cathedral's architect in 1902 at the unlikely early age of 22 after winning an open competition. Liverpool Cathedral was Scott's masterpiece. It was completed in 1978 after his death. It is the largest cathedral in Britain, a Gothic cathedral entirely constructed in the 20th century. Why should the architect of this, with no experience of industrial design and not by training a classicist, be chosen to design the telephone kiosk? One of the reasons was that he tackled all his commissions, large or small, with equal thoroughness. His working drawings were immaculate and detailed. He treated the kiosk as if it were a piece of architecture. The result was the largest and most elaborate telephone kiosk that had ever been produced, the K2. Weighing in at 1 1/4 tons, the cast iron K2 stands 9 foot 3 inches high. With its dome, Georgian-style glazing bars, 54 panes of glass, its elegant mouldings and proportions, presided over by a royal crown, perforated so it could act as the ventilation grille, this was a kiosk in a realm of its own, a majestic piece of street furniture. Scott had suggested that his new kiosk be painted silver, but the Post Office painted it red, and that colour it has remained. If we compare the K2 with Scott's later Jubilee kiosk, the K6, it is clear how enormous the K2 was. At £35 a kiosk, it was too expensive for general use. However, London now had a kiosk worthy of being put on its streets, a sturdy symbol of benign authority.
In the design, this kiosk has an elegant understanding of the balance of fenestration. By that I mean the proportion of glass to glazing bars, because in a sense, these boxes, these pieces of street architecture, are like stepping into, in a sense, you're in a window, you're in a box made of windows. It gives to the street scene a certain romantic quality. People do migrate towards products that have an element of romanticism in them.
The Scott kiosk now belongs to the select band of designs that have become symbols of Britain. But Scott left no records at all to show how he had arrived at his design. But there are some clues connected with the work of the celebrated early 19th century architect, Sir John Soane. After the First World War, Scott was among those who championed a revival of interest in Soane's work. In St Giles Churchyard, St Pancras, North London, is the tomb which Soane designed for his wife, in which he too was later to be buried. One part of Soane's architectural vocabulary, which he repeated over and over again, was a dome which bears a striking resemblance to the dome top of Scott's kiosk. The Art Gallery at Dulwich in South London, designed by Soane in 1811, has a strange addition. A mausoleum containing the bodies of the gallery's benefactors. It is dimly lit by a lantern. Outside, ignoring the urns, there seems to be, emerging from the building, a stone version of the top section of Scott's kiosk, even complete with a panel in which to put the word telephone. And there is a further source. At the top of Sir John's house, now the Soane Museum in Lincoln's Inn Fields, is a sculpture gallery filled with architectural models, including much of Soane's own work. Scott must have wandered through this gallery and come across a model for a tomb designed in 1806 for Samuel Bosanquet, a governor of the Bank of England for whom Soane had worked. Here in the centre section appears to be the prototype of the British telephone box.
Certainly the telephone kiosk is Soanean. I don't think Scott would have consciously copied any one Soane building. He didn't work that way. There were images in his head. But he was influenced by the contemporary revival of interest in neoclassicism. He would have admired Soane. He would have been aware of the writings on Soane coming out by Arthur Bolton and others. And it's interesting that in 1925 he became a trustee of the Soane Museum. So I'm sure Soane's forms were in his sort of artistic subconscious. And it was, in a way, a logical precedent to look at. If you have a square vertical object and you want to finish it off with a top that isn't flat, a Soanean dome is a very logical and beautiful, elegant way of doing it.
We have a product that's deep in our culture, and yet there's an amazing paucity of knowledge about it. There's apparently very little evidence of the thought process that went into the construction of it and his whole sort of processing. But the psychology of it, I think, is all to do with it being substantial. They needed to have a sense of stature. The appearance of these on the street in its day was a real statement about maturity of the society, about the value of communications.
When something is coming along that is really going to change the face of society, we like to squeeze it into a design that makes it look as if we're just going on in the same old way. And I think when you look at that Scott kiosk with its delicately domed roof and its little plinth, we're kind of domesticating and making civilized and making, I suppose, harmless something that is actually turning the world upside down.